What happens when a man at the top of his game decides his pregnant wife is dead weight? Ethan Sterling, the tech genius behind the billion-dollar AI oracle, thought he had it all figured out. He'd trade in his quiet, unassuming wife for a younger model and a new life. He planned the perfect, silent divorce designed to leave her with crumbs while he kept the empire. But he made one fatal miscalculation. He thought the empire was his. He never realized the woman sleeping next to him wasn't just his wife. She was his architect, his ghost, and the silent queen who already held every key to the kingdom. This isn't a story about a divorce. It's about a reckoning. Ethan Sterling looked at his wife Eleanor across the vast expanse of their minimalist dining table and felt a profound sense of boredom. The table, a single slab of polished Italian marble that had cost more than a mid-range sedan, felt like a metaphor for their marriage, cold, expansive, and mostly empty. Eleanor was meticulously arranging a bouquet of white lilies in a crystal vase. Her movements were precise, quiet, and utterly predictable. She was pregnant, a fact that should have filled him with joy, but instead felt like an anchor. At 35, Eleanor still had the quiet beauty that had first drawn him to her. A gentle face, intelligent grey eyes, and a calm demeanor that had once been a soothing balm to his chaotic ambition. Now it just felt bland. She was a comfortable armchair in a life where he now craved a throne. "The board meeting went well," he announced, breaking the silence. He didn't look up from his phone, where he was scrolling through market analytics. Oracle, his AI-driven predictive software company, had just closed another record-breaking quarter. "That's wonderful, Ethan," she replied, her voice soft. She turned, and the gentle swell of her stomach was visible beneath her cashmere sweater. "You must be pleased." Pleased was an understatement. He was electric. He was a god of the new digital age. And gods didn't stay tethered to mortals, especially not mortals who preferred arranging flowers to attending gala events and whose idea of a thrilling evening was reading historical biographies. His decision had been made weeks ago, solidified in the plush, champagne-scented apartment of Chloe Duvall. Chloe was 24, a model, with eyes the color of the Caribbean Sea and ambition that burned as brightly as his own. She was a supernova. Eleanor was a fading star. "I have a meeting with Julian Croft tomorrow." He said the words casual, but the name a carefully chosen weapon. Eleanor paused, her hand hovering over a lily. "The divorce attorney?" She didn't sound surprised, merely inquisitive, as if asking about the weather. Her lack of reaction irritated him. "The best," he corrected. "I want this to be amicable, Elle, civilized. There's no reason for things to get messy." She finally looked at him, her grey eyes unreadable. "Isn't there?" "No," he said, finally putting his phone down and adopting a tone of magnanimous reason. "We've grown apart. It happens. I'll make sure you're taken care of course. A generous settlement. The brownstone in Brooklyn. You and the baby will be comfortable." The baby. He couldn't even say our baby. It was a complication, an inconvenient loose end. But Julian Croft had assured him it was manageable. A pre-birth settlement could be ironed out. Clean. Quick. "I see," Eleanor said, turning back to her flowers. She clipped a stem with a quiet snip. "You've thought of everything." "I try to," he said, a smirk touching his lips. He felt the familiar surge of control, the feeling that had made him a millionaire many times over. He was Ethan Sterling. He anticipated every move, every outcome. He had already instructed his finance team, to begin the process of partitioning his personal assets, ring-fencing the corporate holdings, and preparing a settlement offer that was just generous enough to look good in court, but small enough to be a rounding error for him. He wanted her gone before the baby arrived. A clean break. He envisioned his future with Chloe, the power couple, photographed at Davos, on the yacht in Monaco, on the cover of Forbes. He couldn't have a quiet, pregnant ex-wife haunting the background of his glorious new life. The next day, he sat in Julian Croft's office, a symphony of dark wood leather and panoramic views of Central Park. Croft was a barracuda in a $10,000 suit. She was calm, Ethan reported, a little perplexed. Too calm. Croft chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. The calm before the storm, Mr. Sterling. It's a classic phase. Denial. She thinks you'll change your mind. Once she sees the paperwork, the reality will hit. She'll be emotional, irrational. That's when we apply pressure. We'll have this wrapped up in 90 days tops. And the assets, Ethan asked. Oracle is on the verge of a major government contract. The valuation could triple. I don't want her getting a cent of that. Everything is held in the Sterling Holdings LLC, which is nested within the Oracle Group's corporate structure, correct? Croft asked, reviewing his notes. Correct, Ethan confirmed. Ironclad. She was never involved in the business side. She wouldn't even know where to begin. He remembered the early days Eleanor in their tiny apartment poring over lines of code while he was out networking, charming investors. She'd been brilliant, he'd give her that. She wrote the foundational algorithm, the very core of Oracle's predictive power. But he was the one who had built the empire around it. He was the visionary. She was just the coder. He'd made sure every patent, every copyright was solely in his name. Then she has no claim on the company, Croft said with finality. We'll offer her a lump sum of, say, $5 million, plus the property. For a woman with no career about to have a child that's a lottery win. She'll take it. Ethan left the office feeling buoyant, powerful. The city spread out below him, his kingdom. He sent a text to Chloe. It's in motion. Pack for St. Bart's. He arrived home that evening to find Eleanor in her study. She was surrounded by books, not on history, but on corporate law and asset management. He felt a flicker of annoyance. Was she trying to educate herself? Cute. Ethan, she said, looking up, her face serene. Julian Croft's office called. They're sending a courier tomorrow. Good, he said, loosening his tie. It's for the best, Elle. Is it? She asked, her voice still impossibly soft. She closed the book in her lap. The title was obscured, but he could see it was thick, dense with text. You know, I was just remembering our first apartment. The one with the leaky faucet and the window that wouldn't close. I was writing the source code for Oracle, and you were designing the pitch decks. You told me we were a team, that we would build an empire together, brick by brick. He stiffened. And we did. And now you'll have a comfortable life because of it. Comfortable? She repeated the word as if tasting it. That's what you think this is about? A courier arrived the next morning with a thick envelope. Ethan had already left for the office. Eleanor signed for it, her hand steady. She placed it unopened on the marble dining table right next to the vase of now fully bloomed white lilies. She then made a call. Sarah, she said into the phone. He's made his move. It's time. The first inkling that the world was not spinning on the axis Ethan Sterling had designed came 3 days later. It was a Tuesday, and he was trying to execute a multi-million-dollar wire transfer to a new R&D subsidiary in Singapore. A tactical move to shift liquid assets before the divorce proceedings officially began. Access denied, The red letters flashed on his private banking portal. He frowned, re-entering his credentials. Access denied. Please contact your account administrator. He sighed in frustration and called his private banker at Morgan Stanley. David, it's Ethan Sterling. I'm having some trouble with a wire transfer. Looks like a security glitch. There was a pause on the other end, longer than usual. Mr. Sterling, David began, his voice strained and formal. I'm afraid it's not a glitch. A hold has been placed on all outgoing transfers over $50,000 from the primary holding accounts. Ethan's blood ran cold. A hold? By who I didn't authorize any hold. It was authorized by the account's primary trustee, sir. I am the primary trustee, Ethan snapped. Not according to our documentation, Mr. Sterling. The primary accounts for Sterling Holdings LLC, and by extension, the Oracle Group were restructured 18 months ago. The sole signatory and primary trustee for all major financial movements is listed as Eleanor Vance. The name hit him like a physical blow. Vance, her maiden name. For a moment he couldn't process it. It had to be a mistake, a clerical error of colossal proportions. That's impossible, he said, his voice dangerously low. Run it again. Check the incorporation documents. We have, sir. Several times. The directive came this morning, authenticated with all the correct security protocols. All assets within the Vance Starfall Trust are subject to review and approval by Ms. Vance. I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling, but my hands are tied. The Vance Starfall Trust. He had never heard of it. He slammed the phone down, his mind racing. 18 months ago. What had happened? 18 months ago. He remembered Eleanor suggesting they meet with a new asset management firm, a boutique outfit she'd supposedly researched. She had pitched it as a way to protect their wealth, to create a more tax-efficient and secure corporate structure. He'd been in the middle of closing a massive deal with a Japanese tech firm and had been too busy to get into the weeds. He remembered signing a mountain of paperwork she had prepared. It's just standard restructuring, Ethan, she had said calmly. It shields the company from frivolous lawsuits and minimizes our tax liability. Our lawyers have vetted it. He had trusted her. Why wouldn't he? She was the quiet, organized one, the one who handled the domestic details, which in his mind included managing the paperwork his high-powered lawyers drew up. He'd scrawled his signature on dozens of pages without reading a single clause. He was the visionary. He didn't have time for fine print. A cold dread entirely unfamiliar to him began to creep up his spine. He stormed out of his office, ignoring his assistant's concerned look. Get Julian Croft on the line. Now. When he got home, the divorce papers were still sitting on the dining table, unopened. Eleanor was in the living room, curled on the sofa with a cup of tea reading. She looked up as he entered, her expression as placid as ever. "Did you have a good day, Ethan?" she asked. His rage, which had been simmering all the way from Midtown, finally boiled over. "What is the Vance Starfall Trust?" he demanded, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. She placed a bookmark in her novel and set it aside. "It's our Asset Protection Trust," she said simply. "The one you authorized 18 months ago. I thought it was a beautiful name. Starfall, for when you finally caught the star you were chasing. You went behind my back," he hissed, advancing on her. "You changed the ownership structure of my company." "Our company," she corrected softly, her gaze unwavering. "And I didn't go behind your back. I put the paperwork directly in front of you. You signed every page. You were so busy planning the launch of Oracle 2.0, You said you didn't have time for the boring stuff, and to just handle it. His own words thrown back in his face. He felt a vein throb in his temple. This is some kind of joke. You, a housewife who arranges flowers, think you can control $1 billion company. For the first time, a flicker of something hard and cold entered her eyes. The housewife who arranges flowers is also the woman who wrote 1.2 million lines of pristine code for the algorithm that your entire $1 billion company is built on. The algorithm you named Oracle, but which I called Janus, because it could look both forwards and backwards. The algorithm you took sole credit for. He was stunned into silence. She had never not once brought that up since the early days. He had assumed she had accepted her role as the silent partner, the muse. You have no proof of that. He finally managed his voice hoarse. Don't I? She asked, a faint, sad smile on her lips. You were always brilliant at selling the dream, Ethan. The big picture. You were never very good with the details, the fine print, the lines of code. She stood up, her pregnancy, making the movement slow and deliberate. She walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, overlooking the city. You wanted a quiet, civilized divorce, and you'll get at one. But the terms will be mine, not yours. You tried to cut me out. You tried to cut your own child out. You don't get to do that. Julian Croft will tear this apart in court, he roared. He will bury you. I don't think he will, she said, turning to face him, her silhouette framed against the glittering skyline. He's an excellent divorce attorney, but this is no longer a divorce case. It's a corporate ownership dispute, and the lawyer you should be worried about is Sarah Hayes. The name meant nothing to him. Who the hell is Sarah Hayes? She was the senior partner at the firm that structured the trust for us, Eleanor said calmly. And as of this morning, she is my legal counsel. I suggest you have Mr. Croft give her a call. She's been expecting it. Ethan stood frozen in the middle of his opulent living room, a king in a castle whose keys had just been stolen from his pocket. The woman he had dismissed as a simple, boring fixture in his life was now standing before him as a formidable, unknown enemy. The game had changed, and he hadn't even known he was playing. The emergency meeting in Julian Croft's office was a stark contrast to their first confident encounter. The air was thick with tension. Ethan paced the floor like a Swede predator, his tailored suit feeling more like a straitjacket. Croft sat behind his desk, his face grim, a thick file folder open before him. It's a fortress, Ethan Croft said, his usual swagger completely gone. I've had my top corporate guys looking at this all morning. The Vance Starfall Trust is a masterpiece of legal engineering. It's an irrevocable trust domiciled in Delaware with interlocking charters for every LLC and subsidiary you own. When you signed those papers, you didn't just authorize a restructuring. You performed a complete asset transfer. So reverse it. Ethan slammed his hand on the polished desk. I signed it under false pretenses. Did you? Croft countered, raising an eyebrow. Eleanor will argue she presented it to you as an asset protection strategy, which it is. She will produce emails where you told her to handle the boring stuff. She will show that you, a CEO of a major tech corporation, signed a legal document of your own free will. A judge will ask why a man of your business acumen didn't bother to read what he was signing. Stupidity is not a valid legal argument for nullification. Ethan felt the walls closing in. What does it mean? In plain English. It means, Croft said, leaning forward, that the trust owns Oracle Group, not you. The trust owns the real estate, the stock portfolio, the art collection, everything. You are listed as a beneficiary entitled to a reasonable annual stipend for living expenses as determined by the trustee. But you have no control. You can't sell, you can't transfer, you can't leverage. You're a king with no power." "And the trustee?" Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. "Eleanor Vance, the sole unremovable trustee," Croft confirmed. "The trust's primary charter also contains a poison pill clause. It states that in the event of a divorce filing initiated by you against her, her control as trustee becomes absolute and her discretionary powers are maximized. By serving her those papers, you pulled the pin on your own grenade." Ethan sank into a chair, the fight draining out of him. He felt like a fool. He, the master strategist, the man who could predict market fluctuations with his own software, had been outmaneuvered by his quiet, bookish wife. The meeting with Eleanor's lawyer, Sarah Hayes, took place a week later. They met in a neutral conference room downtown. Sarah Hayes was the opposite of Julian Croft. She wasn't flashy. She wore a simple, dark grey suit. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she spoke in calm, measured tones that held the unwavering certainty of a surgeon. Eleanor was there, a silent presence at her side. She looked serene, her hands resting on her pregnant belly. "Mr. Sterling," Sarah began after the initial tense pleasantries, "we are here to discuss the terms of the separation. Ms. Vance is prepared to be reasonable." "Reasonable?" Croft scoffed. "She's seized control of his entire life's work." Sarah Hayes didn't flinch. A life's work that was built on a foundation she created. "We have here," she slid a thin file across the table, time-stamped server logs from 2018. They show the initial coding and upload of the core Janus algorithm to your private server. The IP address traces back to the apartment you shared, and the logs show the work was done during hours you were verifiably at networking events and investor meetings. The digital signature on the original code is E. Vance. Ethan stared at the file. It was a ghost from the past he had thought long buried. "Furthermore," Sarah continued, her voice cutting through the silence, "Ms. Vance doesn't wish to destroy Oracle. On the contrary, she wants it to thrive, for the sake of her child's future legacy." "What does she want?" Ethan finally ground out. "The terms are simple," Sarah said. "First, the divorce will proceed. Ms. Vance will not contest it. She agrees to full joint custody of the child with a detailed parenting plan to be established." This was a surprise. Ethan had expected her to use the child as a weapon. "Second," Sarah went on, "you will step down as CEO of Oracle Group." "Absolutely not," Ethan exploded, rising from his chair. "You will transition to a role as Chief Innovation Officer," Sarah said, ignoring his outburst. "You will continue to guide the company's technological direction, which is your strength. You will, however, have no executive or financial authority. The board will appoint a new CEO based on the trustee's recommendation. We are suggesting Marcus Thorne." Marcus Thorne was his COO, a capable, steady hand who had been with the company for years. He was also loyal to Ethan. Or so Ethan thought. "Third," Sarah said, her eyes locking onto Ethan's, "you will issue a public statement. In it, you will acknowledge Eleanor Vance as the co-creator of the foundational Oracle algorithm. You will correct the record that has for so long erased her contribution. She doesn't want money for it. She wants the truth." "This is insane," Ethan whispered, looking at Eleanor. She met his gaze, and for the first time he saw not a wife he was leaving, but a brilliant strategist who had cornered him. This wasn't about revenge in the way he understood it, screaming matches and financial warfare. This was a quiet, elegant checkmate. She wasn't just taking his money. She was taking his narrative, the very story of himself he had sold to the world. "And if I refuse?" Ethan challenged. Sarah Hayes leaned back slightly. "If you refuse, Ms. Vance, as the sole trustee of the trust that owns 100% of the company, will simply call an emergency shareholder meeting, a meeting of one herself, and vote to have you removed from the board and terminated as an employee for cause. Given your recent attempts to fraudulently misappropriate corporate funds," she tapped the file detailing his attempted wire transfer, "I believe we have sufficient grounds. You would be left with nothing. No job, no control, and only the reasonable stipend the trust provides, which under those circumstances Ms. Vance might deem to be quite modest." Julian Croft was pale. He looked from Sarah to Eleanor and back again. He was a shark in a tank with a great white. "Think it over, Mr. Sterling," Sarah concluded, standing up. "You tried to erase your wife and child from your life and your legacy. This is your chance to keep a place in both. You have 48 hours to accept the terms." Eleanor stood as well, a silent queen. As they walked out, she paused at the door and looked back at Ethan. "You should have just read the fine print, Ethan," she said, her voice not triumphant, but filled with a deep, profound sadness. "You should have just remembered we were a team." 48 hours. The deadline hung over Ethan Sterling's head like a guillotine. He was trapped, humiliated, and seething with an impotent fury that was entirely new to him. The idea of capitulating, of publicly admitting Eleanor was his equal, his superior in this chess game, was unthinkable. It would shatter the myth of the lone genius he had so carefully constructed. "We fight," he snarled at Julian Croft over the phone. "Drag this through the courts for years. File injunctions, accuse her of coercion, of undue influence. I was in a vulnerable state, overworked, stressed. Ethan, listen to me." Croft's voice was strained. "My corporate guys are telling me your position is untenable. The trust is unassailable. If we fight, we lose. And when we lose, you'll have nothing left. No company, no reputation. Sarah Hayes is not a litigator. She's a killer. She doesn't make threats. She can't back up." But Ethan wouldn't listen to reason. He was a cornered animal, and cornered animals don't negotiate. They lash out. He couldn't attack her legally or financially, so he decided to attack her personally. He would destroy her reputation, shatter her calm demeanor, and force her to the negotiating table on her knees. He called Chloe. "I need you," he said, his voice urgent. "I need you to be seen with me. Everywhere. We're going public." Chloe, who had been waiting impatiently for her glamorous new life to begin, was ecstatic. Within hours, paparazzi magically caught them having an intimate lunch at a chic restaurant. The next day, they were spotted shopping for jewelry at Tiffany's. The message was clear. Ethan Sterling had moved on. The narrative he began to leak through his PR team was subtle at first, then increasingly vicious. Eleanor was unstable. Her pregnancy had made her erratic, and she was trying to exploit a difficult situation. But the masterstroke, the move he believed would break her completely, was far more cruel. He had Julian Croft file a new motion in court. It was a brutal public document. In it, Ethan Sterling formally contested the paternity of Eleanor's unborn child. He alleged that due to their estranged and difficult marital situation, he had significant and grave doubts that he was the father. He demanded a court-ordered prenatal paternity test, a procedure that carried a small but tangible risk to the fetus. The news exploded. It was one thing to divorce your pregnant wife. It was another thing entirely to publicly shame her and question the legitimacy of her child. The gossip blogs, and even mainstream financial news outlets went into a frenzy. The carefully crafted image of Ethan Sterling, the visionary genius, began to crack, revealing something ugly underneath. He thought the public humiliation would shatter Eleanor's composure. He imagined her weeping, hysterical, calling him, begging him to stop. He waited for Sarah Hayes to call, offering to renegotiate. The call never came. Instead, silence. Eleanor, insulated in her brownstone, saw the headlines. Her first reaction wasn't tears, but a cold, hard anger that solidified her resolve. He had come after her company. He had come after her legacy. Now he was coming after her child. He had crossed the final line. She met with Sarah Hayes, her face pale, but her eyes burning with a fierce light. "He wants to play in the mud," Eleanor said, her voice trembling slightly with rage. "Fine. It's time to show the world who Ethan Sterling really is." Sarah nodded, her expression grim. "I have the file ready. Are you sure you want to do this, Eleanor? It's the point of no return." "He made that choice, not me," Eleanor replied, placing a protective hand on her belly. "He wants to scorch the earth. Let's give him a fire." Their counterattack wasn't a press release. It was a surgical strike. Sarah Hayes didn't release a statement to the tabloids. She arranged a single exclusive interview for Eleanor with Diana Rousseau, a highly respected Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist from the New York Times, known for her incisive, in-depth profiles. The article, titled "The Ghost in the Machine," was published a week later. It was a bombshell that detonated in the heart of the tech world. In calm, dignified, and verifiable detail, Eleanor, with supporting evidence provided by Sarah Hayes, laid out the entire story. She didn't sling mud. She simply stated facts. She described the early years, her passion for coding, and the creation of the Janus algorithm. The article included screenshots of the original code, complete with her Vance digital signature, and timestamps that were cross-referenced with Ethan's public calendar of meetings and travel. She explained the creation of the Vance Starfall Trust, not as an act of aggression, but as one of desperation. When the man you love, the partner you built a dream with, starts referring to your shared future as his empire, and you as a domesticated part of his portfolio, you realize you need to protect yourself, and more importantly, your child, she was quoted as saying. Regarding the paternity suit, she was devastatingly composed. "I will of course consent to a DNA test the moment my child is safely born," she stated. "I will not, however, subject my baby to any unnecessary prenatal risks, simply to assuage Mr. Sterling's tactical and cruel legal maneuverings. His accusation is baseless, and it is a transparent attempt to bully a pregnant woman into submission. It is the act of a desperate man who has been caught trying to steal a legacy that was never solely his." The article ended with a simple, powerful line from Eleanor. "I didn't want his money. I just wanted him to remember my name." The public perception shifted instantly and seismically. Ethan was no longer seen as a brilliant tycoon wronged by an erratic wife. He was a credit-stealing thief and a cruel bully. The hashtag #IStandWithEleanor started trending on Twitter. Prominent female executives in Silicon Valley began to voice their support. The board of Oracle Group, which had been nervously watching from the sidelines, was now in a full-blown panic. Their stock, which had been soaring, took a sudden, sharp dip. The government contract he had been so close to securing was suddenly under review. His business partner, Marcus Thorne, called him his voice grim. "What the hell did you do, Ethan?" "The entire company is built on your reputation. You just torched it. You questioned the paternity of your own child in public. Who does that?" Ethan, sitting alone in his penthouse, looking at the scathing headlines on his tablet, had no answer. He had meant to scorch the earth, but he was the one who was getting burned, and his phone rang. It was Chloe. Her voice was cold, distant. "Ethan, I think we need to take a break," she said. This is not what I signed up for. The negative press is affecting my brand." The line went dead. The silence in the penthouse was absolute. He had lost control of his company, lost control of the narrative, and was now losing the very woman for whom he had started this war. His scorched earth campaign had backfired, leaving him standing alone in the ashes. The fallout from the ghost in the machine was catastrophic. At Oracle Group headquarters, the atmosphere was funereal. The stock price was in a steady, sickening decline. Employees whispered in hallways, their confidence shaken. The carefully cultivated image of a company led by a singular, infallible genius had been shattered. Now they were led by a man publicly exposed as a liar and a bully. Marcus Thorne, the COO, called an emergency off-the-books meeting with two of the most senior board members, retired Admiral William Davenport and venture capitalist Anita Desai. "He's a liability," Anita said bluntly, her arms crossed. "The brand is toxic right now. That government contract is gone if he stays at the helm. The morality clauses alone will kill it. He built this company." Davenport argued, his loyalty wavering but not yet broken. "He's the vision." "No." Marcus interjected, his face etched with weary frustration. "That's the story we all bought. The truth, it seems, is that Eleanor Vance built the engine and Ethan built the car around it. The problem is the driver is drunk and he's steering us off a cliff." Marcus had known Ethan for a decade. He'd seen his brilliance and his arrogance up close. He'd always had a quiet respect for Eleanor, noting her sharp intellect in their rare conversations at company events. He'd never questioned Ethan's narrative, but now, seeing the evidence, it all clicked into place. The pieces fit. "What's the play?" Davenport asked. "The play is Sarah Hayes's original offer," Marcus said. "Ethan steps down as CEO. He becomes Chief Innovation Officer. We put him back in the lab where he can do some good and keep him away from microphones and financial controls. I'll take over as interim CEO, stabilize the ship, and we publicly acknowledge Eleanor's role. We rebrand this not as a scandal, but as a correction of the historical record. A story of a female pioneer in tech finally getting her due." Anita Desai's eyes lit up. That could work. It's a powerful angle. It could even be good for us in the long run." The board agreed. Marcus was tasked with the unenviable job of delivering the ultimatum to Ethan. He found Ethan in his penthouse, which now felt less like a palace and more like a prison. Empty glasses littered the tables, and the blinds were drawn against the city. Ethan looked disheveled, a ghost of his former confident self. "They're forcing me out," Ethan said, before Marcus could even speak. He'd already received panicked calls from other board members. "They're saving the company, Ethan," Marcus said gently. "You went too far. The paternity suit. It was unforgivable. She left me no choice," Ethan yelled, his voice cracking. "She cornered me." "She gave you a choice," Marcus countered. "She offered you a dignified role, a way to keep your place in the company you love. You chose to try and destroy her instead. This is the consequence. Take the deal. It's the only one you're going to get." Desperate, and seeing his last pillar of support crumble, Ethan finally bitterly agreed. The next days were a blur of legal formalities. He signed the papers, his hand shaking with rage. He agreed to step down. He agreed to the public statement. The war, he thought, was over. He had lost. But the story had one more twist, one that neither Ethan nor Eleanor could have predicted. It came from the one person everyone had underestimated, Chloe Duvall. After her call with Ethan, Chloe hadn't just gone on a vacation. She'd made a call of her own. Her life as a model was largely a fabrication, a cover for her real profession. She was a freelance operative, specializing in corporate intelligence and high-stakes acquisitions. She wasn't just a beautiful woman Ethan had picked up. She had targeted him from the beginning. Her employer was Quantum Leap Dynamics Oracle's biggest and most ruthless competitor. Their goal was simple, a hostile takeover of Oracle. Chloe's mission was to get close to Ethan Sterling, find his operational and personal weaknesses, and exploit them to devalue the company, making it ripe for a buyout. The divorce and the ensuing scandal were an unexpected gift. Quantum Leap was ecstatic. With Oracle's stock in freefall and its leadership in chaos, they were preparing to launch their takeover bid. But Chloe had a problem. During her time with Ethan, she had recorded hours of their conversations on a micro-recorder hidden in a Cartier bracelet. In those conversations, a drunk and boastful Ethan had admitted everything. He'd bragged about how he'd outmaneuvered Eleanor on the patents, how he'd taken her nerdy little project and turned it into an empire, effectively confessing to the very intellectual property theft Eleanor had claimed. This evidence was her golden ticket, meant to be the final blow used by Quantum Leap in their takeover. But something had shifted for Chloe. She was a professional, often ruthless, but Ethan's public attack on his pregnant wife had disgusted her. It was sloppy, cruel, and unprofessional. More than that, she saw in Eleanor a woman who had been systematically erased and was now fighting back with brilliant precision. She found herself against all odds rooting for the wife. Quantum Leap's plan was to buy Oracle. For pennies on the dollar, gut it, steal the core technology, and fire most of the employees. Chloe knew this. She also knew that Eleanor and her new CEO, Marcus Thorne, would likely save the company and make it thrive. She made a decision that was completely off mission. She contacted Sarah Hayes. "My name is Chloe Duvall," she said when they met in a discreet coffee shop. "I know you have no reason to trust me, but I have something that belongs to you, or rather, to your client." She slid a small USB drive across the table. "These are audio recordings of Ethan Sterling. He confesses in his own words to taking credit for Eleanor's algorithm. He details the entire thing. It's enough to not only win any lingering court battle, but to put the nail in the coffin of his reputation forever." Sarah was stunned. "Why are you giving this to me? What do you want?" "My employers at Quantum Leap Dynamics are planning a hostile takeover of Oracle next week, timed to take advantage of the chaos," Chloe explained. "This evidence was supposed to be their ace in the hole, the final blow to crater the stock. I find their plan distasteful, and your client's strategy impressive." She took a sip of her espresso. "I want two things: $1 million wired to an offshore account, and complete immunity from any legal action. In exchange, I give you the recordings, and I tell you Quantum Leap's entire takeover strategy down to the date time and the shell corporations they're using to accumulate stock." Sarah Hayes stared at the USB drive. It was a weapon of immense power. It could either be used to completely annihilate Ethan Sterling, or to do something much more interesting. It could be used to save the company he built and his legacy, even from himself. She looked at Chloe. "I'll have to discuss this with my client, but I think we can make a deal." Chloe was an opportunist, a mercenary. But in this high-stakes game, the ruthless model had just become Eleanor's most powerful and unlikely ally. The information from Chloe Duvall changed the board game once again. Sarah Hayes and Eleanor listened to the recordings in Eleanor's study, the quiet hum of the city, a distant backdrop to Ethan's drunken, boastful voice filling the room. He was damning himself with every word, his arrogance, a poison he willingly drank. She was a genius at the keyboard. I'll give her that, his recorded voice slurred. But you can't build an empire with code. You build it with charisma, with guts. I took her little science project, and I made it a religion. She should thank me. Eleanor closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of final, painful validation. The truth she had lived with for years was now an audible, undeniable fact. "What do we do with this?" Eleanor asked, her voice quiet but firm. "We have two options," Sarah replied, her lawyer's mind already mapping out the scenarios. Option A. We leak it. It destroys Ethan completely. It will likely trigger a shareholder lawsuit against him and the board. The company will be thrown into even more chaos, making Quantum Leap's takeover almost a certainty. We'll win the battle but lose the war and the company. She paused, letting the weight of that sink in. Or, she continued, option B. We use it as leverage. Not against Ethan he's already beaten, but to protect the company against Quantum Leap. Chloe gave us their entire playbook. We know their shell companies. We know their timeline. We can prepare a defense. A new light entered Eleanor's eyes. This was bigger than her personal victory over Ethan. This was about protecting her creation, the legacy for her child, and the jobs of the hundreds of employees at Oracle. We go with option B, Eleanor said without hesitation. But first, Marcus Thorne needs to know what he's up against. The next day, Marcus Thorne, the newly appointed interim CEO, sat in Eleanor Vance's study. He had expected a tense, formal meeting. Instead, Eleanor and Sarah laid out the entire situation, the imminent hostile takeover by Quantum Leap, and the ace they now held in their hand, the recordings. Marcus listened, his face growing paler with each revelation. "My God," he whispered when they played a short, damning clip from the audio. "I knew he was arrogant. But this—" "Quantum Leap thinks they are attacking a wounded animal," Sarah said. "They have no idea that the company's ownership is now consolidated in a single unassailable trust, and that the trustee has full knowledge of their plan. Too." "So what's our move?" Marcus asked, looking at Eleanor, his respect for her growing by the second. "Our move," Eleanor said, a steely determination in her voice, "is to turn their attack into our greatest strength. We will use the poison pill defense, but not the one in the trust, a corporate one. The board will authorize a massive issuance of preferred shares available only to the Vance Starfall Trust, which will dilute the value of any stock Quantum Leap has acquired and make the cost of a takeover prohibitive. We'll use the trust's capital to initiate a stock buyback program to drive the price up. We will starve them out." It was a brilliant, aggressive strategy. A strategy Ethan himself might have devised if he weren't the cause of the crisis. Over the next 72 hours, Eleanor, Marcus, and Sarah worked tirelessly with the board. Legal documents were drawn up, financial defenses were put in place, and a new narrative was prepared. The day Quantum Leap was set to make its move, Oracle struck first. A press release went out at 8:00 a.m. It announced Marcus Thorne as the new permanent CEO. More shockingly, it announced the creation of a new C-suite position, Chief Architectural Officer. The position had been awarded to the co-founder and creator of the original Janus algorithm, Eleanor Vance. It stated she would be taking an active role in the company's long-term strategy after her maternity leave. The message to the market was clear and powerful. The chaos was over. The company wasn't just stable. It was revitalized with its original creator back in a position of power. The stock price, which had been bleeding for weeks, didn't just stabilize. It surged. When Quantum Leap initiated their tender offer an hour later, the price was already 20% higher than they had anticipated. When Oracle's poison pill share issuance was announced, their hostile bid was dead on arrival. They were caught completely off guard, outmaneuvered and exposed. By the end of the day, Quantum Leap had quietly withdrawn its offer, having lost millions in the attempt. Ethan watched it all unfold on the news from his penthouse. He saw the headlines praising Eleanor's brilliant return and Marcus's steady leadership. He was a footnote in the story of his own company's salvation. He was no longer the titan, the visionary, or even the villain. He was just irrelevant. That evening, his doorbell rang. It was Eleanor. It was the first time they had seen each other alone since their last explosive confrontation. She was calm, her presence filling the room with an authority he had never seen in her before. "The company is safe," she said, her voice devoid of triumph. "I saw," he mumbled, unable to meet her eyes. "Why? Why save it? Why save me from complete ruin?" "Because it was never about ruining you, Ethan," she said, and he finally heard the exhaustion and years of pain in her voice. "It was about stopping you from ruining us. I did it for the employees who depend on Oracle, and I did it for our child." She placed a hand on her stomach. "He or she deserves a legacy. And like it or not, you are a part of that. A flawed, broken part, but a part nonetheless. I won't have our child read one day that their father destroyed his own creation out of sight." She placed a single key on the marble coffee table. "This is the key to the Brooklyn brownstone. It's yours. The trust will provide your stipend, as we agreed. You can continue your work as CIO if you choose, or you can leave. The choice is yours. This is the last time we will speak of this." He stared at the key. It was a lifeline, an act of grace he knew he didn't deserve. He had tried to leave her with nothing, and she was leaving him with a future. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice thick with a shame so profound it felt like it was crushing him. "I'm sorry." She looked at him for a long moment, her grey eyes searching his. She gave a single, sad nod. "I know," she said. And then she turned and walked away, leaving him alone in the silent, empty monument to his own ambition. 6 months later, the world of Ethan Sterling had shrunk, while Eleanor Vance's had expanded beyond anything she could have imagined. Ethan took the deal. He moved into the Brooklyn brownstone, a beautiful home that felt empty and far too quiet. He accepted the role of Chief Innovation Officer at Oracle, but it was a title in name only. He worked from a small, isolated lab, stripped of his executive team and authority. He was back to where he started, just a man with ideas. The difference was, now no one was listening with the same reverence. He was a cautionary tale, whispered in boardrooms. He attended mandatory therapy sessions, a condition Eleanor had quietly added to his employment contract. He was for the first time in his life being forced to confront the man he was not the myth he had created. Eleanor, on the other hand, had flourished. She gave birth to a healthy baby boy, whom she named Julian after her own father, a man who had taught her the value of integrity and quiet strength. Motherhood suited her, but it did not define her. After her maternity leave, she stepped into her role as Chief Architectural Officer. She didn't take Ethan's old corner office. Instead, she chose a more modest one next to the core development team. She was not a remote, imposing figure, but a collaborative leader. Her deep, intimate knowledge of the Janus algorithm allowed her to unlock potentials within the software that Ethan's sales-focused approach had ignored. Under the joint leadership of Marcus's steady business acumen and Eleanor's visionary, technical guidance, Oracle not only recovered, but began to innovate at a pace it hadn't seen in years. They launched a new division focused on ethical AI earning accolades and rebuilding public trust. The stock price reached an all-time high. Eleanor Vance, once the ghost in the machine, was now on the cover of Wired magazine, hailed as the quiet architect of the future. She never spoke of Ethan in interviews, other than to acknowledge his role as a co-founder. Her narrative was one of forward-looking creation, not backward-looking revenge. She managed the Vance Starfall Trust with a quiet, firm hand. It funded philanthropic ventures in STEM education for young women. It became a force for good, using the immense wealth not for opulence, but for opportunity. Ethan saw his son every other weekend. The meetings were awkward at first. He didn't know how to be a father, only how to be a CEO. But in the quiet moments, holding his son, he felt the first stirrings of something real, something more profound than a soaring stock price. He was a fallen king, but perhaps in the ruins of his empire, he could learn to be a man. The final scene of their old life played out not in a courtroom or a boardroom, but in a quiet park on a sunny afternoon. Eleanor was pushing Julian on a swing when Ethan arrived to pick him up. They exchanged polite, brief words. As he was leaving with the child, he paused and looked back at her. "You built something incredible, Elle. Not just with the code, with everything." She gave him a small, genuine smile. "We both did, Ethan. In the end." It was an acknowledgement, an acceptance. Not forgiveness, perhaps, but a peace treaty signed on the battleground of their shared past. He had tried to divorce his pregnant wife, quietly, not knowing she already controlled everything. He had lost his company, his power, and his pride. But in the end, through her strange, unexpected grace, he was left with a chance at something more. And Eleanor Vance, the woman he had tried to erase, had not only reclaimed her name, but had built a legacy far greater than the empire he had tried to steal. She stood alone, but she was not lonely. She was the architect, the creator, and the queen of a kingdom built not on lies, but on brilliance and unbreakable will. In the end, Ethan Sterling's great undoing wasn't a flaw in his business strategy. It was a flaw in his character. He saw his wife as an accessory to his success, forgetting she was its very foundation. This story is a powerful reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. Eleanor Vance didn't just win a divorce. She reclaimed her truth and rewrote her destiny. She proves that true power isn't about loud commands and public glory, but about quiet competence, unbreakable integrity, and the brilliant strategy of knowing your own worth, even when the person closest to you refuses to see it. What did you think of Eleanor's ultimate checkmate? Was her form of justice and mercy the right move? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of quiet power and ultimate justice resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas, where the truth is always more compelling than fiction. Thank you for listening.